The ocean has always been their domain. We were merely visitors, tolerated until now. From the Florida Keys to the California coast, the attacks are no longer random. They're deliberate. When researchers discovered human remains inside a massive great white shark, it became clear something has changed in the deep. The monsters beneath the waves have developed a taste for us, and they're hunting. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin our report on the shark attack that just happened, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing here. Your subscription is very important for us to continue creating content, so please subscribe to support us, hit the like button, and let's get to the case. The Florida Keys coast had always been known for its natural beauty, crystal clear waters, imposing cliffs, and an enviable marine biodiversity. For local fishermen, these waters represented their daily livelihood. For tourists, a paradise, but for scientists like Dr. Michael Green, they constituted a living laboratory where the secrets of the sea waited to be discovered. That morning of February 2, 2025, promised to be like any other for the team from the Gulf Marine Institute. Dr. Green, a 47-year-old man with a face weathered by years of expeditions, led a select group of researchers aboard the Poseidon, a boat specifically equipped for tracking large marine predators. Traveling with him were Rachel Leon, a 38-year-old marine biologist specializing in sharks, Thomas Barker, a meticulous 29-year-old research assistant, and Melissa Castro, a 26-year-old doctoral student whose thesis on shark behavior had captured the attention of the academic world. The objective that day was to locate and collect data on a great white shark they had tagged with a tracking device 2 months earlier. This specimen had sparked particular interest in the scientific community due to its exceptional size, nearly 23 feet in length, an uncommon dimension even for an adult great white. The GPS signals indicate it's about 9 miles from the coast, commented Rachel while adjusting the tracking equipment. It's strange, it's barely moved from the same area for days. Michael nodded with concern. In his 20 years studying shark behavior, he had never seen such a pattern. Great whites were migratory by nature, always on the move, following currents and schools of fish. The Poseidon advanced, cutting through the waves as the sun began to rise above the horizon. The cool Gulf breeze hit their faces, bringing with it that unmistakable salty aroma that they had all learned to love. No one could anticipate that this routine scientific expedition was about to become a nightmare that would change their lives forever. When they had been sailing for approximately an hour, the ship's radio crackled urgently. It was a call from the Blue Horizon, a local fishing boat captained by Elijah Mendoza, a veteran Florida Keys fisherman known for his respect for the sea and its creatures. Dr. Green, we have a situation here. We've found a huge great white shark tangled in our nets. It's alive but barely moving. We believe it could be the specimen you're tracking. Elijah's voice sounded tense, worried. Michael exchanged glances with his team before responding. We're changing course immediately. What's your exact position? As the Poseidon diverted toward the coordinates provided by Elijah, a tense silence took over the vessel. For the scientists, finding a trapped shark was always a delicate situation. On one hand, it represented a unique opportunity for study. On the other, the suffering of a majestic creature. Upon arriving at the location where the Blue Horizon was located, the scene they beheld left them breathless. The great white shark, an imposing creature nearly 23 feet long, was weakly struggling against the nets that imprisoned it. Its blue-gray skin, normally gleaming underwater, appeared dull and lifeless. Elijah and his crew of 4 men seemed exhausted, their hands bloodied from the effort of trying to free the animal. We've been trying to release it for hours, explained Elijah as he wiped sweat from his forehead. But it's too heavy and the nets are too tangled. During the next 2 hours, both crews worked tirelessly to free the shark. Finally, after a joint effort, they managed to hoist it partially to the surface. By then, it was already evident that the animal would not survive. Its movements were increasingly weaker, its gills barely moving. It won't make it, murmured Rachel sadly. We should bring it aboard for a necropsy. A specimen of this size could provide us with invaluable data. The decision was unanimous, though painful. With the help of the fishing boat's crew, they used a crane to hoist the shark onto the deck of the Poseidon. The weight of the animal caused the boat to tilt dangerously before stabilizing. Once the shark was secured, Rachel began to examine it meticulously. There were no visible wounds or signs of disease that would explain its abnormal behavior. However, something powerfully caught her attention. The animal's belly was unusually distended, as if it had recently ingested something extremely large. Michael, I think we should do the necropsy right now, suggested Rachel, with a tone of voice that revealed her uneasiness. "There's something strange in its stomach." Melissa, nervous but determined, positioned herself next to Thomas as they prepared the surgical instruments necessary for the incision. The young student had never participated in the necropsy of a shark of such size, and the mixture of fear and scientific excitement made her hands tremble slightly. With surgical precision, Rachel made the first incision in the shark's belly. The instant the scalpel cut through the skin, a putrid, unbearable stench flooded the deck. The scientists instinctively stepped back, covering their noses and mouths with their hands or handkerchiefs. "My God, what is that smell?" exclaimed Thomas, his eyes watering from the intensity of the stench. But the true horror was just beginning. As they continued with the dissection, the first thing they found was a piece of synthetic fabric, partially digested but still recognizable. It was a fragment of a black wetsuit with blue details. Rachel instantly went pale, exchanging a look of dread with Michael. Both knew what this could mean. With trembling hands, they continued exploring the stomach contents. Among the mass of fluids and partially digested remains, something appeared that froze their blood. A human arm, still partially covered by the sleeve of the wetsuit. Melissa stifled a scream and had to step away, unable to continue observing. Dr. Green ordered the team to proceed. They had to document everything meticulously. It was no longer just a scientific investigation, but a possible crime scene. As they extracted more content from the shark's stomach, the terrible truth became undeniable. There were human remains belonging to not one, but 3 different people. The silence that took over the deck was so dense, it could be cut with a knife. The fishing boat's crew, who had remained aboard to help, crossed themselves almost in unison. Thomas, with blood-stained hands, helped extract the first body, whose remains were less deteriorated than the others. The wetsuit, although damaged, still retained the logo of Blue Reef Expeditions, a well-known diving tourism company operating in the area. Michael immediately made the connection. 2 weeks earlier, 3 female divers had disappeared during a deep-water dive. Their disappearance had been a mystery. Until now, Rachel identified the remains of the second and third bodies, confirming what they feared. They were the missing divers. Their names were Susan Palmer, 33, an experienced diver from Boston, Angela Rodriguez, 29, a marine photography student from Miami, and Helen Collins, 35, a travel blogger from Los Angeles. They had gone out for a routine dive, but something had gone terribly wrong. Back on land, the news spread like wildfire. Authorities, forensic specialists, and media teams gathered at the dock as the Poseidon returned. DNA tests confirmed the women's identities, and an investigation was initiated to determine exactly what had happened on the day of their disappearance. Speculation ran rampant. Had they been directly attacked by the shark, or had they drowned and subsequently been scavenged by the shark? Forensic experts examined the remains, trying to determine if the bites had occurred before or after death. While some specialists believed the shark had simply consumed the bodies after they had already perished, others weren't so sure. The enormous size of the shark and the way the bodies were found suggested an aggressive attack. The victims' families were devastated. They had maintained hope that their loved ones would be found alive. Instead, they now faced an unimaginable truth. The discovery forced authorities to reconsider safety measures for diving expeditions in waters known to be inhabited by sharks. Blue Reef Expeditions was temporarily closed while investigators questioned the crew. Had there been negligence? Had safety protocols been ignored? Meanwhile, the scientific community debated what had led to an event of such magnitude. Great whites were known to be opportunistic hunters, but attacks of this scale were extremely rare. Dr. Green and his team continued analyzing the data from the tracking tag, discovering something chilling. The shark had remained in the same general area for days after the diver's disappearance. It hadn't migrated as expected. Instead, it had stayed, feeding. The case remained open, with many unanswered questions. But one thing was certain. That day, the ocean had revealed a darkness that few had ever witnessed. The waters of the Florida Keys would never feel the same for those who knew the truth about what lurked beneath the waves. The waters off the California coast had always been unpredictable for the U.S. Coast Guard. This stretch of ocean was both a workplace and a battlefield. Strong currents, unexpected storms, and sudden emergencies were part of the daily work. For the vessels that sailed these waters, each outing represented a toss of the coin, a constant challenge against the elements and the dangers hidden beneath the surface. The California Current traversed these waters, bringing with it warm currents and a rich variety of marine life. Fishermen, tourists, and sailors passed through daily, ignoring the dangers lurking beneath the waves. Sharks, especially great whites, had always been a known presence, but attacks were rare. The ocean followed its own rules, and on February 25, 2025, those rules changed in the most violent way possible. That morning, the crew of the Sentinel, a 46-foot Coast Guard response vessel, had been assigned to a routine patrol and search mission. A small fishing vessel had sent a distress call the previous night, but had gone silent before providing exact coordinates. The Coast Guard needed to investigate, ensuring the boat and anyone on board were safe. Petty Officer Daniel Mercer, 34, led the four-man team. He had spent more than a decade with the Coast Guard and had seen almost everything: rescue missions and hurricanes, drug interceptions and capsized vessels. But nothing in his career had prepared him for what was to come. Alongside him were boatswain's mate Travis Reed, 29, a tough and capable sailor with years of experience; machinery technician Hector Alvarez, 31, the team's expert on engines and equipment; and seaman Javier Torres, 25, the youngest member of the crew. This was supposed to be a simple mission: explore the area, check for any wreckage, and report back before noon. The Sentinel had arrived at the location where the last distress call had been recorded. The waters were calm, too calm. They expected to see debris or an empty boat adrift. Instead, there was nothing. Daniel remained at the helm, scanning the horizon with binoculars. Travis monitored the radar, trying to pick up any signal. Hector was performing a final check of the engines, while Javier secured the rescue equipment. Then something hit the boat. It was sudden, a huge impact from below. The entire vessel shook, sending Travis staggering against the console. Javier, who was near the edge, barely had time to grab a railing before almost losing his balance. Hector cursed as tools fell noisily onto the deck. Daniel grabbed the wheel, stabilizing the boat. Then it happened again. A second, more violent blow. This time the boat tilted sharply to one side. Javier lost his balance, his hands grasping at air, trying to grab onto something, anything, but he failed. He fell overboard. The crew barely had time to react. One moment Javier was on deck and the next he was in the water. The ocean swallowed him instantly. For a fraction of a second there was silence. Then the water below Javier exploded. A huge, great white shark, at least 18 feet long, emerged with terrifying speed. It came directly from below, its enormous jaws closing on Javier's torso. The force of the bite lifted him from the water, his body trapped in the predator's grip. His scream was brief, cut short by the crushing power of the shark's jaws. Blood sprayed into the air, mixing with seawater. The shark twisted violently, dragging Javier beneath the water. On the Sentinel, chaos erupted. Daniel grabbed the radio, requesting emergency support. Hector ran to retrieve a rifle stored in the cabin. Travis, without thinking, rushed toward the side of the boat, trying to reach Javier, but there was nothing to grab. Javier was gone beneath the surface. The shark thrashed. The water turned red. For a moment it seemed the attack had ended, but then it resurfaced. Javier's body was still in its jaws, limp, torn. The shark bit again, shaking its prey before dragging it deeper. Travis fired a flare into the water, trying to scare the shark. It had no effect. Hector raised the rifle, aiming carefully, waiting for a clear shot. The shark circled beneath the surface, its outline barely visible in the blood-clouded water. When it surfaced again, Hector pulled the trigger. The shot echoed over the waves. The bullet hit near the shark's dorsal fin, causing it to twist wildly, but it didn't leave. Instead, it turned sharply, as if enraged, and swam directly toward the boat. It rammed the hull again. This time cracks appeared in the fiberglass. The Sentinel was sustaining damage. Daniel ordered the engines to full power. They had to get out of there. Javier was gone. There was nothing more they could do. The shark followed them for a moment, its fin cutting through the water like a knife. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished into the depths. The crew fell silent. The reality of what had happened settled in. Javier Torres, the youngest member of their team, was gone. Taken in seconds, lost to the ocean, they turned the boat around and headed back to base, the weight of what they had witnessed pressing down on them. The Coast Guard had always known the risks of the sea, but this was different. This wasn't a storm or an accident. This had been an attack, and no one on that boat would ever forget it. The journey back to port was the longest of their lives. No one spoke. Words seemed inadequate in the face of the magnitude of what had occurred. Travis's hands trembled as he cleaned blood from the deck, trying to erase the evidence of the horror, but knowing the images would be forever etched in his memory. Hector sat in silence, staring at the rifle he had wielded, wondering if he could have done more, if one more accurate shot could have changed the outcome. And Daniel, with a stony face, kept the course, guilt weighing on his shoulders like a slab. He was the leader. Javier had been under his protection. When the Sentinel finally docked in port, a crowd had already gathered. News traveled fast in the coastal community, and the silence that enveloped the boat as it returned told them everything they needed to know. Families of other Coast Guard members, port personnel and onlookers, watched with somber expressions as the crew disembarked, their uniforms stained and their faces marked by trauma. The regional Coast Guard commander, Frank Anderson, a veteran with 30 years of service, waited on the dock. He had lost men before in storms, in failed rescues, but never like this, never in such a brutal and unexpected way. When Daniel disembarked, words weren't necessary. A silent embrace, a squeeze on the shoulder, conveyed everything that needed to be said. "We'll talk later, prepare a report," Frank murmured. "Now go home, all of you, rest. Psychologists will be available starting tomorrow." But Daniel knew that no amount of therapy would erase what they had seen. The image of Javier being dragged under the water, the sound of his interrupted scream, the helplessness he felt as he watched one of his men being taken before his eyes. Javier's family arrived an hour later. His mother, a petite woman with the same black hair and deep eyes as her son, sobbed quietly while his father, a former fisherman, stood stoically beside her, his calloused hands clenched in trembling fists. They had questions that Daniel couldn't fully answer. Did he suffer? Was there any chance? Why Javier? The truth was too raw, so he gave them a softer version, speaking of how quickly it had all happened, of how their son would hardly have felt anything. In the days that followed, the story of the attack spread throughout the United States. The media descended on the small California port, hungry for sensationalist details. "Marine monster devours Coast Guard," proclaimed the headlines. Shark experts appeared on television shows, explaining that such attacks were extremely rare, that sharks didn't attack humans by choice, that it had probably been a case of mistaken identity. But for those who had been on the Sentinel that day, such explanations sounded hollow. What they had witnessed hadn't been a mistake, but a deliberate hunt. A week after the incident, a memorial service was held for Javier Torres. The small cemetery overlooking the sea was crowded. Coast Guard members from across the country had come to pay tribute to one of their own. In a maritime tradition, since there was no body to bury, a wreath of flowers was cast into the sea at the exact spot where Javier had been taken. Daniel, Travis, and Hector watched it float away, carried by the same currents they had once navigated alongside their fallen comrade. That night, Daniel sat alone on a bench facing the sea. The full moon cast a silver path over the water, seemingly peaceful and innocent. But he was no longer fooled by that beauty. He had seen the other side of the ocean, its indifference, its cruelty. He had witnessed how a young man full of life and promise was reduced to nothing in a matter of seconds. He would no longer look to the horizon with the same sense of adventure and possibility. The Sentinel remained in port for a month while repairs were made and an investigation was carried out. New safety protocols were implemented for patrols in areas known to have shark presence. Additional weapons were provided to crews, and training courses were developed on how to respond to marine predator attacks. But everyone knew these measures were largely symbolic. Against a predator of that size and ferocity, in its own territory, humans remained vulnerable. When the time finally came for the Sentinel to return to sea, there was a new sailor on board, a young man from San Francisco named Michael Sanchez. He occupied Javier's position, but everyone knew he would never replace him. The memory of the lost young man sailed with them, a ghost passenger reminding them of the dangers lurking beneath the seemingly calm waves. And as the boat moved away from the port, venturing once more into the waters of the California coast, Daniel Mercer scanned the horizon, his gaze no longer looking for vessels in distress or signs of storms, but for the flash of a fin cutting. The surface, the shadow of a predator moving beneath the hull. The sea was no longer simply his workplace. It had become a battlefield. And the crew of the Sentinel now knew they weren't the only hunters in these waters. The ocean off the coast of North Carolina's Outer Banks had always been a place of beauty and danger. The deep blue waters stretched for miles, home to an incredible variety of marine life. It was also one of the most well-known great white shark territories in the United States, a reality that attracted both scientists and adventurers alike. Researchers had studied these predators for years, tracking their movements, trying to understand their behavior. For most people, the idea of encountering one was terrifying, but for Ray Huertas, the risk was part of the adventure. On March 12, 2024, Ray, a 27-year-old outdoor enthusiast and live streamer, set out for what was supposed to be another routine kayaking trip. He had been sharing his experiences online for years, building a dedicated audience of viewers who loved watching him navigate the ocean. He had paddled through choppy waters, explored hidden coves, and even encountered dolphins and sea lions. His fans enjoyed the serenity of his broadcasts, the way he made them feel as if they were right there with him. That morning, Ray woke up early in his small apartment in Nags Head, North Carolina. He packed his gear, checked his kayak, and made sure his GoPro and phone were fully charged. He had been planning this trip for weeks, excited to explore a remote part of the coastline. The conditions were perfect: clear skies, calm waters, and enough breeze to keep the heat at bay. By 10 a.m., Ray was already on the water, his red kayak gliding smoothly over the surface. He adjusted his camera, making sure his stream was active. Thousands of viewers had already connected, watching as he paddled beyond the cliffs and into the open ocean. He talked to them as he moved, answering questions, pointing out wildlife, and sharing his thoughts. It was peaceful, exactly what he had hoped for. There was something hypnotic about the rhythm of his paddle cutting the water, the whisper of the wind, and the occasional squawk of seagulls. Ray's followers around the world were captivated. Some watched from their offices during work breaks, others from their homes, all united by the sense of calm he transmitted to them. In the stream's chat, comments flowed. "What a perfect day for paddling. The water looks amazing today, so clear. Ray, how far from shore are you now?" He smiled at the camera, responding periodically, pointing out an osprey flying overhead or a school of sardines glimmering beneath the surface. It was a day like any other on the ocean, until suddenly everything changed. About an hour into his journey, Ray noticed something strange. The water below him darkened in a way that didn't feel natural. He stopped his paddle, letting his kayak glide. At first he thought it might be a shadow from clouds, but there were no clouds above him. His stomach tightened. He had spent enough time on the water to know when something wasn't right. Then he saw it. A massive shape moving just below the surface. At first it was slow, gliding effortlessly beneath him. Ray's heart pounded. He angled his camera downward, trying to capture the movement. The chat on his stream exploded. Some viewers thought it was a whale. Others immediately recognized what it was: a great white shark. And not just any shark, it was huge. "Holy shit, is that what I think it is?" Ray whispered to the camera, his shaky voice betraying his growing unease. The chat was moving too fast to read now, filled with warnings, prayers, and disbelief. Viewers were live streaming a moment everyone feared: a close encounter with one of the ocean's most feared predators. Ray kept his paddle still, barely breathing. He had seen sharks before. It was something inevitable when you spent as much time in these waters as he did. But this was different. It wasn't just passing by, it was watching him. The gigantic grey form circled slowly beneath his kayak as if assessing this strange red creature floating on the surface of its domain. "Okay, everyone stay calm," Ray murmured, trying to sound composed, both for his viewers and for himself. "That's just curious. Sharks do this sometimes, they just investigate and then go on their way." But something about the way this shark was moving told Ray this time might be different. His words sounded hollow even to his own ears, and he could feel cold sweat beginning to run down his back despite the warm Carolina sun. Then, without warning, the shark attacked. The massive predator surged forward, ramming the side of his kayak with incredible force. The impact sent a shockwave through his body, nearly capsizing him. His paddle flew from his hands, landing a few meters away. Panic seized him. His breathing became rapid. His hands trembled as he tried to reach for his paddle. Ray's audience was horrified. Some implored him to keep calm, others begged him to get away from there, to do something. The chat was filled with messages, but Ray could barely process them. His mind was entirely occupied with the thought of survival. The shark wasn't leaving. It circled again, faster this time. Ray knew he had to move, but every muscle in his body was frozen. Fear had paralyzed him, a feeling he had never experienced on the water before. This was his element where he had always felt free and safe. Now he felt like trapped prey, waiting for the next attack. The shark rammed again, this time coming from below. The force lifted the kayak slightly, making it wobble, and then the worst happened. Ray lost his balance, his kayak tilted, and he fell into the water. A collective gasp erupted among his live audience. The screen shook as his camera slipped from its mount, sinking into the ocean with him. The view became chaotic. Water, bubbles, splashes. His breathing was loud and erratic. Ray emerged to the surface, gasping for air. His kayak floated a few meters away, just out of his reach. He turned, trying to locate the shark. It was there, the massive great white circling him like a hunter playing with its prey. "Please don't eat me. Please don't let this be the end," Ray shouted, his words echoing on the broadcast, reaching thousands of people who could do nothing but watch in horror. His face was pale, his eyes wide with terror. He kicked, trying to stay afloat, trying to get closer to his kayak. At that moment, time seemed to slow down for Ray. Each second stretched into an eternity. He could see the huge shark moving in circles around him, its dorsal fin cutting the surface of the water like the blade of a knife. Ray had grown up hearing stories about sharks, had watched documentaries about these predators, but being in the water with one, feeling its presence, the immediate threat to his existence, was something he could never have prepared for. In his mind, images of his life flashed by rapidly, his childhood on the beaches of the Outer Banks, the first time his father put him in a kayak, his mother always warning him about the dangers of the ocean, his first live stream just 3 years ago that had attracted only 10 viewers. Would this be his last stream? Was he about to die in front of a worldwide audience, become a macabre page of internet history? Then the shark moved. It charged again, its massive body cutting through the water with terrifying speed. Ray braced for the worst, closed his eyes, waiting to feel the powerful jaws closing over him. But then a horn blared through the air. A boat, a small fishing vessel, was nearby. The captain, Mike Anderson, had been monitoring his radio when he heard Ray's distress. He and his deckhand, Luke Romano, had immediately turned toward the coordinates. Mike pushed the throttle to full speed, aiming directly at Ray. The shark hesitated. The boat was noisy, disturbing the water. Mike maneuvered as close as he could, shouting for Ray to grab onto the side. Ray didn't think, he just acted. He swam with all his might, his arms burning, his legs barely able to keep him above water. The shark circled one last time, but the boat was too close now. It turned sharply and disappeared into the depths. Luke leaned over the rail, grabbing Ray by the arm and pulling him aboard. He collapsed, his body shaking, his chest heaving. He was alive. The stream was still active. Thousands of viewers watched. As Ray lay there, his hands covering his face, his body soaked and trembling, the chat was filled with relief, shock, and overwhelming support. Mike turned the boat toward shore. Ray sat up, looking back at the water. His kayak was gone, lost among the waves. The ocean had almost taken him, and in that moment he realized he would never look at it the same way again. "Thank you," he murmured to Mike and Luke, his voice still shaking. "You saved my life." Mike, a weathered man with decades on the sea, simply nodded. "The ocean gives and takes," he said. "Today it wanted to give you another chance." When they reached the harbor, a crowd had already gathered. News of the attack had spread quickly through social media. Journalists, onlookers, and even some of Ray's fans waited at the dock. Camera flashes illuminated his pale face as they helped him disembark, his legs still too weak to properly support him. The video of his escape spread fast. Within hours, the media picked up the story. The clip of his desperate plea, "Please don't eat me, please don't let this be the end," was played over and over. For some, it became a meme. For others, a somber reminder of the dangers of the ocean. But for Ray Huertas, it was the moment that divided his life into two distinct parts, before and after the shark. In the days that followed, Ray barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw those open jaws, felt the paralyzing terror of being in the water with a predator. Doctors diagnosed him with post-traumatic stress disorder and prescribed anti-anxiety medication and therapy. Interview offers came from everywhere, from national television shows to international podcasts. Everyone wanted to hear his story, to know what it felt like to be face-to-face with death. Ray declined most, needing time to process what had happened, to find a way to move forward. 3 weeks after the incident, Ray finally streamed again, but not from the water. Sitting in the safety of his apartment, he spoke to his audience, now much larger, due to the notoriety of his experience. "The ocean for me had always been a place of adventure," he told them, his eyes still carrying the shadows of what he had lived through. But that day it became something more. It became a reminder that we are visitors in that world, not its owners. The shark wasn't evil. It was in its home, doing what sharks do. I was the one who entered its territory. Despite his words, everyone could see something had changed in Ray. The lightness with which he used to speak about the ocean was gone, replaced by a somber respect. With time, Ray found the courage to return to the water, though never again alone, and never again so far from shore. His streams changed, evolved. They were no longer just about adventure. Now he talked about conservation, respect for the ocean and its creatures, even the most feared ones. The attack had given him a platform and a purpose. He became an advocate for shark protection, educating his audience about the important role these predators play in marine ecosystems. He organized beach cleanups, raised funds for marine conservation organizations, and worked with scientists to promote a better understanding of sharks. And though he would never forget the terror of that day, the moment his kayak capsized, the sight of the huge great white circling him, the certainty that he was going to die, he would also remember the lesson it had taught him, that the ocean, in all its beauty and danger, deserved both our awe and our respect. For Rey Huertas, the ocean had always been a place of adventure, but on that day, it became something more. It became a teacher whose lesson had almost cost him his life. The Pauwi fishing industry off the Oregon coast has always been unforgiving, with freezing temperatures, unpredictable storms, and dangerous waters filled with some of the world's largest marine predators. The fishermen who work these waters must be tough, experienced, and always prepared for the unexpected. On April 3, 2023, what was supposed to be a routine haddock fishing trip turned into a nightmare for Captain Michael Lopez and his crew. Their boat, the Northern Star, was built to withstand rough seas, but nothing could have prepared them for the violent attack that came from beneath the surface that day. Michael had been fishing these waters for more than 20 years, leading crews on trips that lasted days, sometimes weeks. He knew all the risks, from sudden storms to giant waves, but he had never encountered anything like what awaited them that morning. Alongside him were his lifelong first mate, Dan Wild, an experienced fisherman who had been with him for more than a decade, Mark Reyes, the boat's mechanic and deckhand, and James Carson, the youngest of the crew at 29, eager to prove his worth. The day began like any other, with the crew preparing the boat at the Newport dock before heading out to open. The forecast was clear, and there were no warnings about adverse conditions. The crew spent the first hours of the morning setting up their lines, collecting their first catches, and monitoring the radar for any sign of large schools of fish. The waters off Oregon are home to an abundance of marine life, including pods of orcas that were known to follow fishing boats in the hope of getting discarded fish. Seeing orcas was common, but they had never been a problem before. As the boat moved through the cold waters, the crew noticed movement in the distance. A pod of orcas had appeared, their black and white bodies cutting through the water with precision. At first, the men paid little attention. It was normal for orcas to follow fishing boats, sometimes even stealing fish from the lines, but something felt different about this pod. The way they moved wasn't like the orcas they had seen before. These weren't just passing by, they were surrounding, observing. Michael watched them as he continued the operation, pulling in the latest catch. Then, without warning, a violent jolt shook the boat. The impact was so strong it sent James staggering backward, nearly knocking him overboard. The crew rushed to regain their balance, grabbing onto railings and looking around confused. The boat had been hit by something powerful. Before they could react, another impact struck the hull, this time with more force. The sound of creaking wood resonated through the air as the boat tilted to one side. Michael's heart pounded as he realized something was deliberately attacking them. He shouted to Dan to check for damage, while Mark ran below deck to assess if water was coming in. Then, the orca emerged at the surface. It was massive, larger than any they had ever seen. It swam close enough for them to see its eyes, dark and focused. It wasn't just investigating, it was targeting them. Without hesitation, it dove again, disappearing beneath the surface. The crew barely had time to process what was happening before the next blow came, this time even more forceful. The hull groaned under the pressure as another crack appeared along the side of the boat. Dan tried to start the engine, but it coughed and stalled. The last impact had caused more damage than they thought. Mark shouted from the hold that water was leaking in fast. They were taking on water, and if they didn't get the engine started, they would be stranded. But the orca wasn't finished. It emerged again, moving alongside the boat, before turning sharply and ramming the stern. The force lifted the rear momentarily before slamming it back down against the water. James, who had been securing the fishing lines, lost his grip and crashed onto the deck, gasping as the air was knocked from his lungs. He struggled to get up, his hands slipping on the wet wood. Michael grabbed the radio and sent out a distress signal, hoping someone nearby would pick it up. The signal was weak, and they were too far out for an immediate response. They were alone with a sinking boat and a predator that seemed determined to finish the job. The next attack was the most devastating. The orca rammed the boat head-on, causing the entire vessel to shudder. The crack in the hull widened, and the icy seawater rushed in. The men knew they had to abandon ship before it was too late. Michael gave the order to grab life jackets and prepare to deploy the emergency raft. As they rushed to secure what little they could, the Orca returned for a final blow. It hit the stern with enough force to send a wave over the deck, nearly washing James and Dan overboard. The boat tilted dangerously, its fate sealed. The crew had no choice but to jump into the freezing water and swim to the emergency raft, which barely stayed afloat. For a moment, the Orca disappeared, leaving only silence. The men paddled desperately, their breath coming in short gasps as the freezing water sapped their strength. They reached the raft and climbed aboard, shivering, their eyes scanning the water for any sign of the predator. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack ended. The Orca was gone. The men sat in stunned silence, watching as the Northern Star tilted to one side before disappearing beneath the waves. Their boat, their equipment, everything they had worked for was gone. Hours later, a nearby fishing boat, the Silver Tide, responded to their distress call and pulled them from the water. The crew was exhausted, physically and mentally drained by what they had just survived. They had seen orcas before, but never like this. The attack left more questions than answers. When they finally arrived at port, their families were waiting, faces filled with concern and relief. Michael's wife, Ellen, ran to him, hugging him tightly as tears ran down her face. "I thought I had lost you," she whispered against his chest. Michael held her, words stuck in his throat. How could he explain what they had experienced? How could he make her understand the terror of being at the mercy of such a powerful and relentless creature? The following days passed in a blur, as authorities took statements and marine experts tried to make sense of what had happened. The story of the Orca attack spread quickly through the fishing communities of the Oregon coast, generating fear and fascination. Some fishermen refused to go to sea, fearing a similar fate. Others armed themselves, vowing they would not be victims. 2 weeks after the incident, Michael sat in the kitchen of his small house overlooking the sea. His hands, normally steady, trembled slightly as he held his coffee cup. He had been a fisherman all his life, following in the footsteps of his father and grandfather before him. The sea ran in his veins, was part of who he was, but now for the first time he felt an apprehension he couldn't explain. "You'll go out again, won't you?" asked Ellen, watching him with knowing eyes. Michael looked out the window toward the horizon, where the sky met the sea in an endless line. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "Everything has changed," and so it had. The attack had altered something fundamental in him, had shaken a confidence he had taken for granted for decades. He no longer saw the ocean simply as a place of sustenance and wild beauty. Now he also saw it as a place of unpredictable danger, inhabited by creatures whose intentions and capabilities he was only beginning to understand. Meanwhile, marine scientists debated the unusual attack. Orcas, known for their intelligence and complex social behavior, rarely showed aggression toward vessels. Some speculated that the Northern Star might have inadvertently invaded a hunting territory, or that the Orca might have had previous negative experiences with fishing boats. Others suggested it might have been an anomalous individual, exhibiting behavior that deviated from the norm for its species. Whatever the reason, the incident had shaken assumptions about these apex predators. If an orca could deliberately attack and sink a fishing boat, what else might they be capable of? And what did this mean for humans who shared their habitat? As the weeks passed, the waters off the Oregon coast returned to their normal rhythm. Fishermen returned to the sea, though many now sailed in groups, finding safety in numbers. New protocols were implemented for orca sightings, and maritime authorities issued warnings and guidelines for vessels in areas known for their presence. 3 months after the attack, Michael finally made his decision. With the insurance paid, he had acquired a new boat, smaller than the Northern Star but solid and reliable. He named it Second Chance. Dan and Mark joined him again, along with a new crew member, Mark's 22-year-old son Alex, who insisted on following his father to sea despite the risks. The morning of their first outing, Michael stood on the dock contemplating his new vessel. The fear was still there, a constant companion he knew would probably never leave him completely. But alongside it was something else, a renewed determination, a deeper respect for the power of the ocean and its inhabitants, and a promise to sail with greater caution and awareness. As the Second Chance moved away from the harbor, Michael kept his eyes on the horizon, vigilant for any sign of black fins cutting the surface. He knew the orcas were still out there, that this was as much their home as his. But now he understood more clearly the terms of their coexistence. He was a visitor in their world, sailing by their tacit permission, always aware that the balance could tip at any moment. Scientists had studied orcas for decades, cataloging, their behaviors, tracking their migrations, observing their social interactions. But for Michael and his crew, orcas were no longer simply subjects of study or picturesque attractions. They had become a vivid reminder that the ocean, in all its vast beauty, remained a wild and unpredictable place, where humans, despite all their technology and confidence, could still find themselves abruptly returned to their place in the natural food chain. And as the Second Chance ventured into the same waters where they had lost the Northern Star, Michael knew he would never forget the lesson he had learned that day. That respect for the sea and its creatures wasn't just a matter of tradition or superstition, but a necessity for survival. The Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego had always been an important training ground for the U.S. Navy. Its vast, unpredictable waters provided the perfect setting for exercises that prepared officers for real combat and survival situations. The area was known for its strong currents, deep trenches, and diverse marine ecosystem. It was also home to one of the ocean's most feared predators, the great white shark. For decades, the presence of these massive creatures had been documented by researchers and military personnel alike, but no one expected what would happen on May 6, 2024. That morning, Lieutenant David Parker and his team were preparing for a scheduled diving training session near Catalina Island, a location frequently used by the U.S. Navy for submarine navigation practices. David, a 34-year-old officer with years of diving experience, had been through countless exercises like this. His role was to lead a team of 4 divers: Chief Petty Officer Eric Vega, Petty Officer Second Class James Rivers, Seaman First Class Robert Hayes, and Petty Officer First Class Matthew Clark. The group had trained together for months, entrusting their lives to one another. The day had begun like any other. The crew boarded their vessel, the Navy ship Barracuda, and reviewed their objectives. The mission was simple: perform a deep water dive, practice emergency resurfacing maneuvers, and test new communication equipment. The weather was clear, and the water calm, ideal conditions for their session. After a final check of their equipment, the men geared up, securing their oxygen tanks and adjusting their fins. The cold water enveloped them as they descended, their bodies adapting to the pressure with each meter they went down. David led the way, keeping his team in formation as they moved toward the ocean floor. The underwater environment was dark, despite the sunlight filtering through the surface. Visibility was limited, but the team stayed focused. Schools of fish swam swiftly past them, and occasionally the shadow of a larger marine creature passed in the distance. Everything seemed normal. Approximately 20 minutes into the dive, the team reached the designated depth. They activated their navigation equipment, performing drills and testing the communication lines with the ship. Their breathing was steady, their movements synchronized, the result of hours of rigorous training. Then, without warning, something changed. The ocean around them felt different. A disturbance in the water sent vibrations through their bodies. The first to notice was Matthew Clark, who signaled to David, indicating movement in the distance. David turned his head, his eyes scanning the area. At first, there was nothing but open water, but then a shadow emerged from the depths. It was enormous. Before the team could react, the creature came fully into their field of vision. A massive great white shark, at least 20 feet long, gliding toward them. Its size was overwhelming, its movements slow but deliberate. It wasn't behaving like the smaller sharks they had seen before. This one was hunting. David signaled his team to remain calm and stay together. Training had taught them that sudden movements could provoke an attack, but as the shark continued its approach, its intention became clear. It wasn't just passing by, it was fixed on them. The team barely had time to prepare before the attack began. With terrifying speed, the great white lunged forward, its jaws lined with razor-sharp teeth closing on David's leg, sinking deep into his flesh. The force was immediate and unbearable. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to free himself, but the shark's grip was relentless. A cloud of blood erupted in the water, reducing visibility for the rest of the team. David's scream, though muffled by the ocean, was heard through the communication device. His team sprang into action, their instincts overcoming their fear. Eric Vega, the most experienced diver after David, grabbed his diving knife and lunged at the shark. He stabbed its side, aiming for the sensitive gills, hoping to force it to release its grip. James Rivers and Robert Hayes joined in, using their diving tools to strike the predator. The shark, momentarily distracted, loosened its grip. David, though barely conscious from the pain, kicked with what strength he had left, freeing himself. But the danger was far from over. The shark, enraged by the resistance, turned its attention to the others. It collided violently, its powerful tail sending shockwaves through the water. The team knew they had to get David to the surface quickly. His leg was severely damaged, and the blood loss was worsening by the second. Eric signaled the team to begin an emergency ascent. They gripped David firmly, pulling him upward as fast as they could without causing decompression sickness. The shark didn't give up easily. It circled them once more, watching, waiting for another opportunity to attack. The ascent seemed like an eternity. David's vision blurred, his body weakened. The cold of the ocean seeped deeper into his bones, threatening to drag him into unconsciousness, but his team refused to let him go. They pushed upward with everything they had, their lungs burning from the rapid movement. As they neared the surface, the outline of the Barracuda came into view. Crew members on board had already seen the disturbance below and were preparing to assist. The moment David broke the surface, hands reached down, lifting him aboard. The team rushed onto the deck, their bodies shaking and their breathing ragged. Medics rushed to David's side, pressing bandages against his wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. His leg was shattered, the tissue torn beyond recognition. His pulse was weak, his skin pale. The radio crackled as the crew called for an emergency airlift. A helicopter was already on the way. Minutes later, the sound of rotor blades filled the air. The medics worked frantically as they lifted David onto the stretcher. His teammates remained silent, their bodies still trembling from the encounter. David had entered the water as a leader, strong and confident. Now he was being airlifted, barely clinging to life. His attack sent shockwaves through the Navy, leading to immediate assessments of training exercises in known shark territory. Great whites had always been present in the waters off California, but this level of aggression had never been seen before. The military, known for its control over extreme environments, had faced a course they couldn't predict or stop. David's survival was uncertain as he was transported to the hospital. His team, exhausted and shocked, watched as the helicopter disappeared into the sky, knowing none of them would ever forget what had happened beneath the waves that day. At the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, a team of surgeons waited. The helicopter landed on the platform on the roof, and David was quickly transported to the operating room. His condition was critical. He had lost too much blood, and the damage to his leg was extensive. The doctors worked for hours, fighting, to save both the man and the limb. Meanwhile, at the naval base, Commander Alexander Morris, senior officer of the diving unit, listened with grave attention as Eric Vega, still dressed in his wet wetsuit, described the attack. The briefing room was filled with high-ranking officers, all trying to understand how a routine training mission had ended in disaster. It was as if it had been stalking us, Eric explained, his voice shaky despite his efforts to maintain professional composure. I've seen sharks before, but this one was different. It moved with purpose, as if it knew exactly what it was doing. Commander Morris frowned, scribbling notes in his notebook. Was there any warning sign? Anything that could have alerted Lieutenant Parker or any of you to the imminent danger? Eric shook his head. No, sir. Everything was normal until it wasn't. It happened so fast. In the room, James, Robert, and Matthew nodded silently, their faces pale with the memory. Morris sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. We'll suspend all diving operations in that area until further notice. I want a complete review of our safety protocols and an updated risk analysis for all training zones. As the officers discussed the next steps at the hospital, David's family had arrived. His wife, Martha, a 32-year-old schoolteacher, waited outside the operating room, tears running silently down her face as she held the hand of their 7-year-old son, Adrian, who didn't fully understand why his father wouldn't be coming home that night. It was 3 hours before a surgeon, still in his blood-stained gown, came out to speak with her. We've done everything we can, he said softly. He's lost a lot of blood and the damage to muscle and bone was extensive. We were able to save the leg, but there's a long road ahead. Martha felt momentary relief mixed with continued terror. Will he live? The surgeon nodded slowly. He's stable for now. The next 24 hours will be critical, but he's strong. He fought hard. In the days that followed, as David lay unconscious, connected to machines that monitored every heartbeat, every breath, the incident became the subject of intense scrutiny. Marine biologists and shark experts were consulted, all trying to understand what had triggered such an unusual and aggressive attack. Some theorized that the shark might have been protecting a nearby feeding ground. Others suggested that the diving equipment and communication devices might have emitted frequencies that the shark interpreted as distress signals from potential prey, but no one could offer a definitive explanation. For the US Navy, the incident was a harsh reminder of the unpredictable dangers that lurked even in seemingly safe waters. New safety protocols were implemented, Divers would now work in larger groups, carry shark-repellent devices, and conduct more thorough checks for recent shark sightings before any dive. A week after the attack, David finally regained consciousness. Disoriented and weak, his first thoughts were for his team. "Are they all safe?" he asked Martha, who had spent every moment by his side. When she assured him they had all survived unharmed, he closed his eyes in relief before sinking back into a drug-induced sleep. The road to recovery was long and painful. Multiple surgeries, endless physical therapy, and the psychological trauma of the attack took their toll. There were moments of despair when David, once a confident and capable diver, would wake up screaming, trapped in nightmares where the ocean turned red and sharp teeth closed over him again and again. But there were moments of triumph too, the day he took his first steps without assistance, though shaky. The afternoon his son drew him as a superhero who had fought a giant shark for his school assignment, and the visit from his team, who showed up in full uniform, a show of respect and camaraderie that reminded him why he had chosen this life in the first place. 3 months after the attack, David was sitting on the porch of his home on the outskirts of San Diego, looking out toward the Pacific in the distance. His leg, now a network of scars, constantly reminded him of his encounter with the depths. "Will you ever go back?" Martha asked him, sitting beside him and handing him a cup of coffee. David looked toward the horizon, where the blue of the sea met the sky. "To the water, yes," he said after a long moment. "To diving? I don't know." The truth was that the ocean had been more than his profession, it had been his passion. Since childhood, raised in the coastal town of Oceanside, he had felt its call. He had enlisted in the Navy specifically for its diving program, seeking to combine his love for the sea with his desire to serve his country. Now that same sea that had once filled him with wonder and peace had shown him its darkest, most merciless side. The great white, a creature he had always respected from afar, had become a specter that haunted both his dreams and his waking moments. But even as he struggled with his fear, David knew he owed the ocean a debt. It hadn't just taken something from him, his safety, his confidence, nearly his life. It had also given him something in return, a new appreciation for the fragility of human existence and the wild immensity of the natural world. 6 months after the attack, David made a decision. He wouldn't return to military diving, his body no longer capable of meeting the demanding physical requirements. Instead, he accepted a position as an instructor at the Naval Academy, teaching new recruits about marine safety and survival. His scars, both physical and emotional, became powerful teaching tools, a vivid reminder that the ocean, beautiful as it is, must always be treated with respect and caution. And occasionally, when the nightmares became less frequent and the pain in his leg reduced to a dull ache, David found himself looking at the sea with something akin to longing, because despite everything, the ocean remained the ocean, vast, mysterious, and full of life. It had taken, but it had also spared. It had hurt, but it had also healed, and perhaps someday, when he was ready, it would call to him once more, and he would find the courage to answer. The beaches along Miami's coast have always been a favorite destination for families looking to enjoy the warm waters and soft sand. On June 18, 2022, Sarah Carter took her 10-year-old son Stephen to Miami Beach for what was supposed to be a relaxing day under the sun. It was a typical summer afternoon, with tourists setting up umbrellas, children building sandcastles, and waves gently breaking on the shore. The ocean seemed welcoming, and Stephen was eager to get into the water as soon as they arrived. Sarah watched as her son ran toward the waves, his enthusiasm evident in every step. He had always loved the ocean, fearless of the immensity that stretched before him. She spread out a beach towel, placed her cooler beside it, and sat down to keep a close eye on her son. The shoreline was shallow, the water only reaching Stephen's waist as he played. Other children swam nearby, their laughter mixing with the sound of seagulls flying overhead. The Atlantic Ocean was known for its rich marine life, home to dolphins, sea turtles, and a variety of fish species. It was also home to sharks, though attacks in the area were rare. Bull sharks in particular were often seen in these waters, known for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in both salt water and fresh water. Unlike other shark species that preferred deep oceanic waters, bull sharks were comfortable venturing into shallow coastal areas, sometimes alarmingly close to swimmers. Stephen continued splashing, unaware that beneath the surface something had been watching. A 12-foot bull shark had been swimming nearby, attracted by the movement in the water. It moved silently, its powerful body cutting through the currents. Unlike the people on the beach, The shark wasn't playing, it was hunting. Sarah leaned back, on her elbows, enjoying the warmth of the sun on her skin. She glanced at Stephen every few seconds, feeling a sense of peace as she watched him having fun. Then something changed. People near the shoreline began pointing toward the ocean, their faces shifting from amusement to concern. Sarah sat up, her body tensing. The water around Stephen had darkened, rippling unnaturally. Before she could fully process what was happening, the shark attacked. The attack happened in an instant. The huge bull shark lunged at Stephen, closing its jaws around his leg with terrifying force. A piercing scream cut through the air as the water turned red. Stephen thrashed, his small body helpless against the powerful predator, dragging him toward deeper water. Sarah's heart stopped. Her instincts screamed at her to run toward the water, but her legs refused to move. The helplessness was unbearable, every muscle in her body paralyzed with terror as she watched her son being dragged away. On the beach, people reacted in shock, some screaming, others paralyzed by disbelief. A man grabbed his phone, calling 911, while a group of tourists stood at the water's edge, unsure what to do. Then, from the lifeguard stand, someone was already moving. Kyle Harrison, a 25-year-old lifeguard, had been scanning the beach from his post when he heard the first screams. His training kicked in before he even fully understood the situation. Grabbing a rescue buoy, he ran toward the water, plowing through the waves with every ounce of strength he had. The shark, still holding onto Stephen's leg, dragged him farther from shore. The boy's arms flailed, his screams cutting through the breaking waves. Blood swirled around him, drawing even more attention from beachgoers who could do nothing but watch in horror. Kyle reached Stephen in seconds, but the shark wouldn't let go. With adrenaline pumping through his veins, Kyle hit the predator on the snout with the buoy. The impact startled the shark, causing it to release its grip for a brief moment. Without wasting time, Kyle grabbed Stephen, wrapping an arm around his chest and dragging him toward shore. The boy's body was limp, his face pale from shock and blood loss. The bull shark wasn't finished. It circled, preparing for another attack. Kyle kicked hard, pushing toward shallow water. He knew he only had seconds before the predator returned. On shore, 2 more lifeguards had rushed into the water to help. They met Kyle halfway, lifting Stephen between them and carrying him to the sand. Sarah collapsed beside her son, her hands shaking as she reached for him. Stephen's leg was torn open, deep wounds exposing flesh and muscle. Blood poured onto the sand, the bright red staining the golden beach. The crowd surrounded them, some crying, others praying. A woman offered her towel, pressing it against Stephen's leg in an attempt to stop the bleeding. The sirens of an approaching ambulance echoed in the air. Kyle stayed beside Stephen, his hands covered in blood, his mind racing with everything he had just witnessed. He had been a lifeguard for years, trained in rescues of all kinds, but nothing had prepared him for this. He had never faced a shark attack before, and the weight of what had just happened settled heavily on his chest. Paramedics arrived quickly, assessing Stephen's condition. They secured his leg, working to control the bleeding as they loaded him onto a stretcher. Sarah climbed into the ambulance with him, her fingers clutching his hand tightly. She couldn't stop shaking as the ambulance sped away. As the ambulance disappeared, the beach fell silent. The attack had lasted only minutes, but the horror would remain forever in everyone's memory. The water, once a place of joy and laughter, now carried an air of fear. People hesitated before entering, looking around as if expecting another shadow to appear beneath the waves. Kyle remained near the shoreline, his gaze fixed on the ocean. Somewhere out there, the bull shark had disappeared into the depths, its hunger momentarily satisfied. He knew sharks weren't evil, that they only acted on instinct, but the reality of what had just happened made that knowledge difficult to accept. The following days were a nightmare for Sarah. She waited as Stephen underwent emergency surgery to repair the torn tendons and muscles in his leg. Doctors warned her that recovery would be long and difficult, that her son might need more surgeries and months of physical therapy, but what mattered was that he was alive. Sitting by his hospital bed, watching his small face still pale from blood loss, Sarah felt torn between gratitude and absolute terror at how close she had come to losing him. When Stephen finally regained consciousness, his first question was about the huge fish that had attacked him. Sarah tried to explain in words a 10-year-old could understand, trying not to convey her own fear. Child trauma specialists warned her that Stephen might develop a fear of water, nightmares, even post-traumatic stress disorder, and recommended therapy as soon as he was recovered enough. Meanwhile, the attack had sent waves of shock through the community. Authorities temporarily closed Miami Beach, while shark experts and marine biologists investigated. Oddly, bull sharks rarely ventured so close to the crowded beaches of Miami, preferring the warmer, less crowded waters to the south. What had drawn this particular specimen so close to shore, and why had it attacked? Some scientists theorized it might have been a case of mistaken identity, that the shark confused Stephen's splashing movements with an injured seal or turtle. Others speculated that changes in ocean currents or feeding patterns due to climate change might be driving sharks into new territories. Whatever the reason, the incident sparked renewed debate about beach safety and the growing interaction between humans and marine life. Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm. Journalists approached seeking interviews, wanting to hear the story of the mother whose son survived a shark attack. She declined all requests, focused solely on Stephen's recovery. But she couldn't help noticing how the event was already being sensationalized on the nightly news and in newspapers. Horror at Miami Beach. Boy attacked by killer shark, proclaimed the headlines, ignoring the fact that shark attacks were extremely rare and that sharks weren't killers, but predators acting according to their natural instincts. The narrative that bothered Sarah most was the one portraying Kyle Harrison, the lifeguard, as a carefree hero who had fought a shark and won. Though deeply grateful for his actions that had undoubtedly saved her son's life, she knew from her brief exchanges with Kyle that the young man was struggling with his own trauma from the event. He didn't see himself as a hero, just someone doing his job, and the media sensationalism made him uncomfortable. 2 weeks after the attack, when Stephen was stable enough to receive visitors beyond immediate family, Kyle came to the hospital. He entered the room shyly, carrying a teddy bear and a card signed by all the lifeguards at Miami Beach. "Just wanted to see how the little warrior was doing," he said, smiling at Stephen, who lay in bed, his leg elevated and wrapped in bandages. "You're the man who fought the shark," exclaimed Stephen, his eyes lighting up. The attack had been traumatic, but in the mind of a 10-year-old, it had also transformed into a kind of adventure, something he could brag about to his friends once. The initial fear subsided. Kyle laughed, shaking his head. "Not exactly, I just got you out of the water. The shark decided we weren't very tasty and let us go." As she watched their interaction, Sarah noticed that Kyle's presence seemed to calm Stephen in a way nothing else had since the attack. Perhaps it was because Kyle had been there, had experienced the same terror, had felt the same panic. There was a shared understanding between them that even Sarah, with all her maternal love, couldn't fully penetrate. That night, after Kyle left, promising to visit them again, Stephen slept without nightmares for the first time since the attack. A small step, but significant. The months passed slowly. Stephen underwent 3 more surgeries to fully repair the damage to his leg. Physical therapy was agonizing, with sessions often ending in tears of frustration and pain. But gradually, day by day, he regained his strength. The scars would remain, long, jagged lines marking where the shark's jaws had pierced skin and muscle, but the doctors were hopeful that in time he would regain almost full functionality in his leg. The most difficult aspect of recovery, however, was psychological. As the specialists had predicted, Stephen developed an intense fear of water. Even baths became traumatic, and as the next summer approached, the idea of returning to any beach gave him panic attacks. It was then that Kyle Harrison reappeared in their lives. Having left his job as a lifeguard to study marine biology, he proposed an idea, a therapy program specially designed for children who had experienced water-related trauma. The program would combine education about marine life, including sharks, with gradual exposure to water in a controlled, safe environment. "We can't guarantee something like this won't happen again," he explained to Sarah. "Sharks are unpredictable, and the ocean is their home. But we can reduce the risk through education and reduce the fear through understanding." Sarah, though reluctant, knew she couldn't allow Stephen to live in fear forever. The beach had been an integral part of their life in Miami, and denying her son the joy of the ocean because of one incident, terrible as it was, seemed a different kind of tragedy. On the first day of the program, Stephen stayed away from the water, watching from a distance as Kyle explained the different types of sharks and their behavior. On the second day, he came close enough to sit at the shore, allowing the waves to touch his feet. On the third, he agreed to go in up to his knees, clutching Kyle's hand tightly as he anxiously scanned the water for shadows. It was a slow process, with steps forward and back. There were days when Stephen refused to go near the water, days when fear paralyzed him, but Kyle never lost patience, never forced him, simply waited and offered a steady, reassuring presence. A year after the attack, Stephen finally swam in the sea again. It wasn't at Miami Beach, but at a small protected cove north of the city, with safety nets and watchers. It wasn't the carefree, joyful swimming he had once enjoyed. Now there was caution in his movements, an awareness of the world beneath, the surface that hadn't been there before. But he was in the water, and for Sarah, watching from the shore with her heart in her throat, it was enough. The attack at Miami Beach changed more than just the lives of Stephen and Sarah. It led to a reassessment of safety protocols on American beaches, with increased vigilance and better warning systems for shark sightings. It also inspired conservation efforts, as experts emphasized that sharks, including species like the bull shark, were under threat from overfishing and habitat destruction, and that their presence in healthy marine ecosystems was vital. For Kyle Harrison, the incident redefined his career and purpose. He stopped seeing sharks as simply terrifying predators and began to appreciate them as complex, fascinating creatures that deserved respect and protection. Through his program, now formally recognized and funded by the Miami Beach City Council, he worked to spread this message, not just to children who had experienced trauma, but to everyone who came to enjoy the sea. And for Stephen, the scars on his leg became more than just a reminder of horror. They also became a badge of survival, a story to tell. It wasn't the story his parents would have chosen for him, marked by pain and fear, but it was a story of resilience, of overcoming the unthinkable. The sea, with all its beauty and danger, would continue to be a part of his life, though now he faced it with a wisdom beyond his years, knowing that beneath its calm surface, both wonders and perils awaited those brave enough to venture into its depths.